Welcome to a perspective on sustainable capitalism, realizing the influences at work. I realize there are numerous influences against the possibility of sustainable capitalism, though might there be a few influences that could be put in place to actually support or promote its emergence? Executives tend to have a short-term focus, which produces short-term results, which is driven by the short-term investor focus. So we end up with a very short-term reinforcing structure that continues to promote the focus on short-term. And in addition to that, the executive compensation is typically driven by short-term results, which further promotes the short-term focus, which focuses more on short-term results. So we have another reinforcing structure that continues to promote a focus on short-term results. Though what happens is that in time, sooner or later, the short-term focus will result in long-term difficulties. Those long-term difficulties will then diminish the short-term results, having an impact on executive focus and their short-term executive focus. Though, for the most part, I think executives tend to convince themselves that they'll finish and be gone before it'll ever happen to them, or they're actually too good to have long-term difficulties happen on their watch. One way or another, there are a couple of reinforcing structures that promote the likelihood of running into long-term difficulties because of the continued focus on short-term results. Now, the long-term investor ought to be in a position to mitigate the short-term executive focus to some extent. The difficulty that arises is that the short-term investor tends to diminish the long-term investor focus, therefore allowing the executive to continue with the long-term focus, and we end up with another reinforcing structure promoting short-term focus. So things are continuing to promote the short-term, knowing that sooner or later the long-term difficulties will happen, so that it will balance out at some point and the organization will run into difficulties. The board of directors should have a long-term focus and diminish the executive short-term focus, though in many instances the executive short-term focus overrides the board of directors' long-term focus, and you have another vicious reinforcing structure that focuses on short-term. Now, the question is, might it be possible to set up the laws of incorporation such that it holds the board of directors and the executive responsible for the long-term health and development of the business, so that that could actually flip this vicious reinforcing structure into a virtuous reinforcing structure where the short-term focus is diminished, and therefore the board of directors takes a longer-term focus, and therefore mitigating the longer-term difficulties. It's a thought, and give it some thought, ponder it, and I look forward to your comments. This perspective was adapted from A Systems View of Sustainable Capitalism by Mark Van Cleef of MBC Associates. Note that if you access the presentation itself directly, all of the loop labels have comments on them, as well as any of the elements which have shadows on them. So take care, and I'll see you in another perspective soon. Bye.